Hello and welcome to TrackVia's Tips and Tricks series. My name is Michelle Martz Mayfield and I am the PR and Corporate Communications Manager at TrackVia. Today we're going to do a tips and tricks on using flows for better data. But first I'm going to start us off with some basic housekeeping. You have started in listen-only mode. Please keep it that way so everyone can hear what's going on in the webinar. If you have a question, please submit it in the chat window. If we don't get to that question at the end of the series, then we will follow up with those answers in an email afterwards. This webinar is being recorded and we will send you a follow-up email within 48 hours with that recording. So with that, we will get started. I will hand you off to Jenny Beer, our solutions consultant, and she will get you going on flows. Thank you, Jenny.
Yep, thanks, Michelle. So today we are going to talk about flows. I'm going to turn on my video here so you guys can all see me as well. So today we're going to start with a definition of flows, just what are they and when you might want to use one. We will also take a look at a couple of examples, specifically a branching scenario and then adding child records on mobile. We will talk about avoiding some common mistakes. And then, of course, answer your questions. So you can submit them throughout, and then at the end, if you can submit them if you haven't already. So we'll start with that just general definition. What are flows? And we will work our way up to talking through the example flow that you see here on the screen. So flows, the kind of general definition of a flow is a custom data intake process for your users. Flows allow you a way to string together a series of forms and views for your end users. So they can add a new record, they can edit an existing record, they can select that existing record from a view, either just by choice, like selecting it from a grid view, or you can configure that to select based on a variable, which we'll explain later. Flows also allow you to present the right form based on selected data. So you may have an intake process where you want to maybe capture initial customer information, and then based on maybe where that customer is located, you may have additional information that you need to record, and you want to present another form. So you can have multiple forms together, and then based on some initial information, present a follow-up form. And then finally, flows allow you to return the user to the dashboard. So it gives this nice streamlined experience rather than if you're familiar with forms in TrackVia, you complete that information on a form and you click save and then you're still on that form. So flows return that user to the dashboard. So here is an example of the add new material flow. So this is a really basic flow where the user just clicks a button on the dashboard to start, then is taken to an add form to add a new material in this case. And then when the flow ends, that user is returned to the dashboard. So we're actually going to take a look at this really basic flow in action so you can see some of those elements from the end user perspective. So here we are in TrackVia, and you can see I'm in a field services application, and I have this materials management app. And I have a big button here for add new material. This is what the end user sees for that same flow that we were looking at in the admin process with that start and then one form and end. So to see how that works, I click this big button to add a new material. And then here I can give it an ID. So I'm presented with the add form for this new material. And I can enter in all my information. I can include a file just like I would on any other regular add form. And then you'll see here I have a save button that has been renamed. So on a regular add form, if I were looking at this in not a flow, this would say save, and then there'd be another one for save and add new. So this has been renamed, which is one of the benefits of a flow, to say save new material. Once I've completed adding my information, I'm going to click that button, and then I'll be returned to the dashboard. And then you'll see my new material, water softener, is here. So that's an example of a basic flow that's just one form, but it gives this nice streamlined experience where I've been able to rename that save button and return a user to the dashboard. So now that we have some idea of why I might use a flow and how that basic format works for an end user, we'll take another look at a slightly more complicated flow, just one additional step actually. In this example of a flow, I would start by clicking a button, but in this case, instead of an add form, I have another step here where I first am selecting a record from a view. And so this is another way that you can use a form for editing an existing item. So in this case, I could actually scan a barcode to select a routing step. And then that will take me to an edit form where I can add additional details for the particular product that I selected or for that step. So flows can be very simple, and then you can start adding additional steps using views and edits as well as add. And then you can work your way up to a more complicated branching scenario like this flow. And we are actually going to spend some time looking at this one in TrackVia in just a little bit. But here you can see that I still start with a view step, and then based on the job type that I select, I am going to be routed to the appropriate form. So I have an option in that field, a drop-down field on this form that has 3 choices for a job. I can either do a checklist, I can perform a work order where I add line items, or I could do both, where I then do a checklist and add a work order. So this flow allows me to branch to different forms and present the right form to the person based on the selection on that initial form. And we'll work through these details actually to see this in action. So flows for that end user experience, while a flow on the admin side as you build that can look fairly complicated, to the end user, it's just this nice button on a dashboard that will walk them through the process. They can also be really big. So just like any other dashboard element, you can configure the size and the position of the flow button. This title of the flow is something that you assign when you create the flow. And you can also have more than one flow button on a dashboard. So in this example, we have a field services app, and the crew leader starts a daily production report, which includes a timestamp of that initial start. And then at the end of the day, can click the button, the flow button, to complete it, which is going to bring up that same production report with an end timestamp so that you can determine how long that job took in the field. So you can position these flow buttons appropriately on your dashboard. You can certainly have more than one flow button too, and they can work together. We've kind of covered some of this already when we would use a flow, but just to summarize kind of this initial, what are they and why do I care? So one of the most common reasons to use a flow is to return users to the dashboard. Give that nice streamlined experience, even if it's just a single form, it's not a whole string of steps. It's nice to take somebody back to the dashboard to start the next process. You can also relabel the save button, as we saw in that example. That can be a complete and submit. If you have a series of steps, then that save button can look like a next button or add more. And we'll see some examples of that as well. Another reason for using a flow is adding child record after creating or viewing a parent. This is really powerful for mobile especially, because the embedded child view on a mobile device is difficult to use, or you can't add child records. And so using a flow for that scenario is very powerful. And then finally, you can use flows to navigate users to unrelated tables. So maybe as part of your data intake process, you have, let's say you're taking information on a custom order, and you know that there's going to be a special material and you want to flag that for maybe the requisitions team. So those 2 tables wouldn't necessarily be related, but in a flow, you can navigate between all those various maybe child tables or other pieces of your business to capture the right information. So that is a basic format of what flows are and why you might use them. So let's dive into some details about building them in TrackVia. I'm going to take us back into TrackVia and actually take us into a project tracking application so we can look at an example of a fairly straightforward flow first. So on this project tracking application, I have a dashboard for creating new projects and assigning them out to different project managers. Project managers then can manage those projects and assign tasks. And we're going to look at the My Tasks dashboard. So this is showing only the tasks that have been assigned to me as a team member, which is a limited user. I have a flow here to complete an open task. And down lower on the dashboard, you'll see that I have this My Open Tasks view. So this view is showing all the tasks that have been assigned to me that are not yet completed. That's important to see because this flow is actually going to reference that same view to be able to pull the tasks that I still need to complete and give me that filtered selection to start with. To see how this works, we're actually going to recreate that flow for completing an open task. So in the admin toolbar, I would go to Flow and New Flow and click the plus button. So here we are in the flow builder. I can give my flow a name. This is what will show up in that button when you put it on the dashboard. So I'm going to complete a task. And then I take this create new task and I drop it onto the flow builder and I connect it from start to new task. Then I can configure this task. So I have options here for add, edit, and view. Add means I'm going to use a form to add a new record. Edit means I'm going to edit an existing record, and view means I can select which record I would like to work from a view. In this example, I want to present that My Open Tasks view to the user so they can select one that is not yet been completed but is assigned. So I'm going to choose this to make this a view task. Oh, I should give it a name. Oh, select task. And then here, I am able to select from all of the views that are in this application. So this is a critical tip for creating flows. You are going to be using views and forms to create flows, and it's best to have all of those already created because you are not able to save a flow until you have a view or a form assigned to a step. So it's best to have them already made, and then you can save the flow once they've been assigned. So I'm going to select from the assets that are in this application. So I'm going to select the view. It's on the tasks table, and we already know it's the My Open Tasks. And then I have the option for how do you want them to select that record. I want the user to choose from a grid so they can choose which task they are working. You can also use a scanner, a barcode scan to open an item, open a record, or you can also use a variable, which I'll explain in another example. So we're going to do choose from a grid. And then you also have an option here. You can, if for some reason you can't move forward, then you are able to exit. Or if you're further along in the flow, you could go back to the previous step. Maybe you made an error or something like that. So I configured this initial task where they are going to select which record they would like to open. Now I drag another one on, I connect it, and then I give this one a name, and this is to complete the task. And then I will say this is an edit because the record of that task already exists. That's how it was assigned. So I don't want them to add a new one, I just want to edit. And then I select which form I want to use. Again, it's here on task, and it's a complete a task form. So I've already configured that form with the right information. And then I'm able to add a label for the save button. So I could say maybe it's now called finish instead of save or submit. Maybe if I had another step coming up, it could say next. Finally, I'm going to put an end on so that I then know that my flow is over and they can be returned to the dashboard. So I've saved that flow. And now if we want to see that in action, we can actually go to the dashboard. If I wanted to add this new flow to the dashboard, I would edit that dashboard. And then they'll show up over here, actually defaults to flows when you first come into editing a dashboard. So here's the one that we just completed. You just add it, it'll pop it into the bottom, and then you can reconfigure that as necessary. We already had a completed one there on the dashboard, so I'm actually just going to cancel this, and then we can see how this works. So to complete an open task, I'm going to click that button. It's going to present me that same option from that view that was on the bottom of my dashboard. And then I'm going to select the overdue one here. And it's going to take me to the form that I selected. And then I can add my date completed. And I could add any additional information based on my form. And then complete task is what my button shows me. And I can complete that and come back to the dashboard. So in this case, we strung together just 2 steps, selecting from a view and then opening the appropriate form to just give that nice streamlined experience to the user. Something that's important to remember is that I am a limited user in this instance, right? I'm a team member. So I need to make sure as the admin who's built this flow that I have permissed the view and the form to the particular user who will be accessing those items in the flow. Every item that's used in the flow, every view and form needs to be permissed to the user who would be using that flow. Otherwise, you'll run into a permissions error. They won't be able to access that and they'll be stuck in the flow. So when you are creating those assets initially that you think you're going to need in the flow, as you think through what are the items that I want to present and the form, that will capture the data that's required in that step, you're making those assets ahead of time. And then you're also going to make sure that you permiss those in that role. So in this case, I'm a resource, a team member, and I go down to tasks, and then you'll see here the My Open Task, as well as the Complete a Task. So this is the view that we selected. That same form is assigned to that view, and both of those are permissed for this particular role who will be using that flow. So those are kind of 3 pieces, I guess. Prep your assets ahead of time, make sure that you permiss those assets to the appropriate role, and then build your flow. So that was a fairly straightforward example. Let's take a look at that more complicated branching example that we saw in the beginning. That one is in my asset tracking and maintenance app. So I'm going to navigate to that application. In this example, we have an asset management application, so there's a variety of different assets that people can check out. We can also then conduct maintenance on those assets, so that maintenance job can be assigned to a technician. And we're going to look at the flow for this technician. So in this technician's flow, if you remember, there were 3 options. You can complete a checklist, you can complete a work order that requires line items, and then you can also do both of those things. And this is really meant to be completed on a mobile device. So I'm going to actually show you that mobile device and bring that over here, bring my tablet to my desk. So here we are looking at that same technician dashboard. Here's the completed work order flow. And then we are looking at the My Assigned Work Order. So that flow is going to start initially by letting me select from the work orders that are assigned to me. So we're going to complete the flow so you can see that those decision points in action and see how they look to the end user. And then we'll take a look at how they were configured by the admin. So I'm going to complete a work order. If I had a barcode here, I could scan it, or I can also just select the work order from this grid view. And then it shows me all the information about that work order. So the asset that I am working on, the scheduled date, who I am as the scheduled technician, all of that was already existing in that record when it was assigned to me. So this is an edit step. And then here is this job type that is the decision criteria for that branching scenario that we saw. So if I choose checklist, then you'll see this perform maintenance checklist. This next button changes work order, and it says perform work order, and then both allows me to do both of those things. So we're going to do both. I select that, and then I have, again, all of this information for that record is already populated for me on that form. And then I can complete my checklist. So I can go ahead and say, in this case, everything passed. And so my save button now says next. And because I selected that, the both option, I'm now going to be going to the add labor and parts. I click this, And now I'm actually adding line items for that job. So this is allowing me to create line items on a child form in my flow. So I've navigated from that parent job to this line item, and so that I can add labor and parts. So obviously to this end user, I'm just going through a series of forms, but this is, and this is why flows are so powerful. It looks pretty simple and streamlined. They don't realize that I've moved to another table, but I'm just presenting the right information based on the work that they're doing. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and say I'm adding labor. I could include a description, I can include the labor rate, how many hours I worked. And then for my next button here, you'll see it says add another line item. And this is allowing me to go ahead and create another child record if I need to. Maybe I have other labor at a different rate, maybe I have parts. If I select yes, then it's going to say review job because I don't need to loop through that again. I'm done. I will review my job. It's opening up that parent item again. And here all of those parent fields are completed for me, shows me all the information I included as that checklist, shows me a summary of the line item that I created. And then I can put in the date that was completed and sign off, and then complete my work order job and be returned to my dashboard. And you'll see that my count of incomplete items has reduced by 1. So that's that flow in action for the end user, presenting a series of different forms based on my choices, allowing me to add child records. So pretty nice experience for the user, especially on that mobile device. So let's take a look at how we built that on the admin side. I'm going to remove the mobile tablet there, and then we're going to take a look at this one on the admin flow builder. So here we are on that flow builder. This was made in the same way as that simple one that we made, where you just drag these items onto the flow builder. What's new compared to that previous one is this decision. So this decision item allows me to define how I will route people through these 3 different branches. So this decision, when I went to edit it, for each time that this is connected to a new task, I then have the option to configure that results setting. So here, you'll see when I clicked on this one, it's a little bit hidden there, but it's shown up in blue as this is the one that is work order. So this is that branch of my flow. And I can give that a name just to keep my internal options straight. So as I'm thinking through this logic, I know what route this means to me. And then here's where I gave that label. So I said perform work order. We went through the maintenance and work order option, which then that was what my next button looked like. These are all determined by a condition. So I can edit this condition, and you can see here is where I use that same condition builder that you would use for creating filters. I am able to set that as the job type. So this condition builder actually shows me all of the fields that are on the form. In this case, there's only one form, before this decision. So I only have this one form, the select job type step, and then it tells me the form name that's associated with that step. And then it's saying, which field do you want to look at? In this case, it's job type. And then I'm saying, has this option selected, and both. So you use that same that logic condition builder to set the decision criteria. Then from there, depending on what I select, I'm either going to go and look up the open job. So when I am routed from a decision, it's sort of like a clean slate. And I need to tell TrackVia, okay, I made a decision. Now I'm branching away from, into my new line, if you will. What is it that I want them to do? Well, I want them to edit this same, job that they selected in this step. And so I need to just go pull up that parent record or that record. And so I will go ahead and use a view step. And in this case, I'm using a variable rather than having the user reselect that same job. I'm going to use a variable. I'm going to look for the record ID that was selected in this initial step. So I'm going to say that job that they selected, find that same record ID in that same view that I used earlier, and go ahead and open that, because it should find only one if the record ID is unique. It will find only one, and if there's only one item in a view in a flow, TrackVia will automatically open that. So we'll find that, and then it will take me immediately to the next step for performing that checklist, which is an edit function, because that checklist information is held in the same table in that same record that was selected for the job. And that would be the same step that I do up here for performing just the checklist. My next button, or my save button, functions like a next button. Here's the label that I gave that to add work order and labor parts. And then here in my add labor parts, this is actually an add, because now I am saying I want to add a record using this, this form, and this is actually for the line items form. So when I went and selected this, this is actually a child to the overall job. So I selected that form, and it's an add form. And then I've used something called a variable on this form. In order to automatically link this child line item to the overall job that I have selected, I need to use a variable. I have a couple of variables here, but this one, the work order number. I've selected the record ID for that job, and then I have put it into the link to maintenance work order, the link to parent field on that form. So when we went to add the labor, the top part of that form already had, here's the work order number, as well as some other information about this is the asset and, some other reference information. And that was already populated on that form, and that's done through a variable so that I, as the user, don't have to make that link to parent. It's already done for me. And that's part of how, putting in this work to create these variables as the admin provides that really simplified, streamlined experience for the end user. It also ensures that you have accurate data. Creating line items that are not linked to the appropriate parent or any parent obviously is not going to provide you very accurate data. I then have another decision here. So I've added my line item, and then I have a decision that is just really two options. If I need to add more items, then it's going to take me and loop me right back to that same add form so that I can add another child. And that condition is based on that option that said, were you done adding line items, yes or no? And something important to look at in that condition is that now that I'm further along in my flow, I will see all of the forms to select fields from. So I want to make sure, done adding line items, that I'm looking at the right step and with the right form assigned. Because I could go and look at one that was for the work order technician in a different branch of my flow, and that same option, that same line item option might show up in a different form, in a different step. And so you have to be really careful to make sure that you're basing your decision criteria on the field in the form within that same branch. So that's a tricky gotcha. So I've selected my decision criteria there. And then finally, I will go find that parent, since I was on that child form there. I'll find that same parent, again using a variable to search through my view step, and then present that final form that gives me all the summary information and the sign off. And so that is again using an edit form and selecting that form that I created already with the appropriate summary level fields and sign off fields. So for the admin then, obviously, a lot of pieces to think through, building out those forms ahead of time, thinking through at each step, what will the people need? And then once it's time to create that flow, it's just making sure you're assigning the right task and the right form or view to that task. So that takes us back to our last slide here, where we can just kind of summarize some of the mistakes that we've talked about, or some of the common gotchas that can happen when you're building flows. So obviously, we talked about permissions. If you have not set permissions for those people, then you will see this error. So you have to make sure you go permiss all those assets. If for some reason using a variable like the record ID has been removed, that column was removed from your view, then you can get this mistake or this error. And so it's helpful to name your view as flow, so that, flow open jobs. And that way, nobody else will maybe edit that view by mistake and eliminate the column that you're searching for. And then cannot proceed. So this one would be, in that example where we wanted to complete a checklist, we could add a work order line item or both. Maybe we forgot to build out the both branch, but we selected both in our dropdown. Then you would get this one where the flows didn't know where to send that person. And so this would be another one where you have to make sure, maybe, based on the temperature of something that you're reading, you have two next steps. And you said if the temperature is under 100 or over 100, but the temperature is 100. So you have to really think through those conditions and make sure that you account for every option. And I know we covered a lot, flows, there's a lot to keep in mind. So just know that there are great articles in the knowledge base about everything we discussed today. So if you need a refresher, that's available there. So just in summary, know that we will be sending an email with the recording of this webinar. As you leave this webinar also, you will be asked to complete a survey. So if you have any feedback for us, we would definitely like to hear it. And then if you want any more information, you can just email me if you would like at jenny.beer@trackvia.com. That's it for today. So I will just leave this open for any questions in case anybody has any. Otherwise, I know we are at the end of our time as well. For those who can stay, I did have a question whether you can use calculated or triggered fields for a decision condition. And yes, you can. So maybe based on the data that somebody has provided, there's a calculated field that determines what the status of something is. And you want to route someone based on that status in that calculated field. So if it triggers to alert or manager approval needed, you want to route them appropriately. And you can do that. Calculate the decision points and flows will run after all the calculated fields run. So those calculated or triggered fields can be used as a decision criteria. It looks like that's it for now. So thank you everybody for coming, and we will hope to see you on another webinar soon.